Take a moment and be still. Before you continue scrolling, stay here for a moment. If you found your way to this message today, it was not completely accidental. It was not merely a random moment in your feed. Something deep within you was searching for these words, and somehow they found their way back to you. So remain here for a little while. I want you to think about this special person right now. Allow their face to come clearly into your mind. Then notice what happens inside you when it does. That gentle pull in your heart. That mixture of warmth, longing, and something you cannot fully explain. That feeling is not confusion. It is your heart recognizing something your mind is still trying to make sense of. Because this person is not simply someone who appeared in your life by accident. On a deeper level, something within you already feels familiar with them. And I understand how exhausting it can be to carry a love this significant when everything surrounding it feels uncertain. All those nights you lay awake, holding these feelings quietly inside, wondering if you are imagining the signs, wondering if any of it truly matters in the end. It matters more than you realize. You are not being foolish. You are not being overly emotional or unrealistic. You are someone standing in the middle of something that may become deeply meaningful, and that is exactly why it feels so difficult right now. If you feel intensely connected to someone, even when it hurts, understand that these kinds of connections carry a unique power. What makes these connections so profound is that they do not merely touch the surface of who we are. They reach directly into the parts of ourselves we have spent years trying to control, hide, or simply survive around. Many people believe love is supposed to arrive like relief, like finally reaching calm waters after years of struggling to stay afloat. But the relationships that truly transform us often arrive more like a storm before they bring peace. They shake loose everything that has been buried beneath old coping mechanisms, emotional defenses, pride, fear, and survival patterns. At first, that shaking can feel more like falling apart than growing stronger. When someone enters your life and reaches places nobody else could touch, your protective strategies suddenly stop working. The person who has always given too much begins to recognize how exhausted they are from constantly proving their worth and sacrificing their own needs. They start questioning why they believed closeness had to be earned through endless emotional effort, patience, and self-sacrifice. This realization can be painful because it forces them to confront the possibility that they learned love was not guaranteed simply because they existed. At the same time, the other person often faces an equally frightening reality. They may have survived by remaining emotionally distant. Closeness became connected to pain, betrayal, disappointment, or loss, causing their nervous system to interpret genuine intimacy as a threat. They pull away not because the connection lacks significance, but because the intensity of the feelings feels too overwhelming to manage. On the surface, it appears like an unequal dynamic, where one person pursues while the other creates distance and seems completely uncertain. Yet, underneath the surface, it is often two wounded systems responding differently to the same fear of rejection and inadequacy. The pursuer believes love will disappear without constant effort, making silence almost unbearable. But they must learn that abandoning themselves is too high a price to pay for connection. Their value is not measured by how much pain they can endure for another person. The person who withdraws frequently carries the opposite wound. Somewhere inside them is the belief that if someone gets too close, they will eventually lose themselves, disappoint the other person, or become emotionally trapped. So they instinctively create distance the moment things begin to feel real. Yet that distance rarely brings peace. More often, it brings guilt, confusion, loneliness, and an even greater awareness of how much they genuinely care. Because avoiding vulnerability may protect them from rejection temporarily, but it also prevents them from receiving the love they secretly desire. And healing is rarely elegant in the beginning. Sometimes it appears as confusion. Sometimes it looks like inconsistency, emotional overwhelm, fear, or extended periods of silence while someone tries to understand themselves more clearly. Growth often looks messy before it begins to look wise. A caterpillar literally dissolves inside the cocoon before becoming something entirely new. Transformation has always required a form of ending first. Not physical death, but the ending of old identities, outdated defenses, and limiting beliefs that can no longer survive within deeper love. That is why these connections can feel almost unbearable at times. They reveal contradictions within us. They show how deeply we crave closeness while simultaneously exposing how afraid we are of it. They force us to understand the difference between attachment and authentic love. Attachment says, "Please do not leave because I need you to fill what feels missing inside me." Authentic love eventually says, "I want to meet you fully while also learning how to remain whole within myself." That shift changes everything. But here is the part that deserves your attention most. This is the piece many people overlook. In every one of these connections, there comes a turning point. And it does not arrive through a dramatic event or a long-awaited conversation. It does not happen because they finally say the words you have been hoping to hear. It happens because of a decision you make quietly within yourself. The decision to stop waiting to be chosen and begin genuinely choosing yourself. And when that shift occurs, something within the entire dynamic begins to change. Not because love works like magic, but because whatever energy you bring into the space between two people has an effect. When you stop reaching towards someone from a place of fear, lack, or desperation, you stop becoming something they instinctively feel the need to move away from. And for perhaps the first time, they are left alone with what they actually feel about you. Not what they fear, not what they have been avoiding, but what is genuinely there. And what is there has never truly disappeared. I want you to trust that deeply. There is something important I need you to sit with rather than quickly reading past it. Everything you have experienced during this waiting period has carried meaning. Every single moment of it. Not 1 second has been wasted. I know there are times when it feels that way. I know there are moments when you look back at all the love you have given and wonder whether it simply vanished into empty space, whether it reached anyone at all, whether any of it was worth the emotional investment. But here is something worth remembering. Love does not simply disappear. It does not evaporate into nothingness. Every quiet evening spent thinking about someone who is not beside you, every night you fell asleep carrying feelings with nowhere obvious to place them, has contributed to something. That love remains real. It continues shaping you. It continues deepening you into someone capable of holding something extraordinary if and when it finally arrives. When you cry because something that feels so right also causes so much pain, it is not evidence of weakness. It is not proof that you are fragile. Those tears often represent a heart that refuses to abandon something it recognizes as meaningful. They reveal a rare kind of loyalty and emotional honesty. Most people find a reason to leave when things become this difficult and uncertain. They protect themselves before they can be hurt any further. They convince themselves that detachment is easier than remaining open. They tell themselves that caring less is safer than caring deeply. But there is a difference between abandoning yourself and protecting yourself. There is a difference between healthy surrender and emotional avoidance. The lesson has never been about loving less. The lesson has been about loving without losing yourself in the process. The more you learn to stand firmly within your own worth, the more clearly you begin to see this connection for what it truly is. You stop viewing it through the lens of fear and start seeing it through the lens of truth. You stop measuring your value by another person's ability to show up consistently. You stop making their confusion a reflection of your worth. And something remarkable happens when that shift takes place. The waiting no longer feels like punishment. The uncertainty no longer controls your entire emotional world. You begin living again. You begin creating again. You begin becoming the person you were always meant to be, regardless of what another person chooses. Ironically, This is often the point where everything starts changing. Because genuine love does not flourish where fear controls every decision. It grows where two people gradually become capable of meeting each other as complete individuals, rather than as wounded versions of themselves searching for rescue. That journey takes time, sometimes more time than either person wants, sometimes more healing than either person expected. But meaningful transformation has never followed a perfect schedule. It unfolds according to readiness, awareness, and growth. So if you find yourself in the middle of this experience right now, do not assume the silence means nothing is happening. Do not assume the distance means nothing is changing. Some of the most important growth occurs beneath the surface, long before anyone can see evidence of it. Trust your own growth. Trust the lessons you are learning. Trust the strength you are building. And most importantly, trust that your life is bigger than this waiting period. Because whether this connection ultimately becomes the relationship you imagine or serves another purpose entirely, it is already transforming you. It is teaching you how to love without abandoning yourself. It is teaching you how to remain open without losing your boundaries. It is teaching you how to hold hope without becoming dependent upon outcomes. And those lessons are priceless. The truth is that the greatest gift hidden inside these experiences is not simply the possibility of ending up together. It is the person you become while moving through them. A person who knows their worth. A person who no longer chases validation. A person who understands that real love never requires self-betrayal. A person who can stand confidently in both love and uncertainty without losing themselves. And that version of you is already emerging, even if you cannot fully see it yet. It would have been incredibly easy for you to shut down completely, build walls around your heart, and decide that loving this deeply was simply too much of a risk. Many people experience enough disappointment, enough waiting, and enough uncertainty that they eventually become quiet. They close themselves off because the emotional cost feels too high. You had every reason to make that same choice, and honestly, no one would have blamed you if you had. Yet you remained open when closing yourself off would have been easier. You stayed gentle when becoming hard and guarded was the more obvious option. In a world that often rewards detachment and emotional distance, your willingness to stay connected to your heart is not a weakness. It is a remarkable strength. To love wholeheartedly without constantly calculating what you might receive in return is becoming increasingly rare. It is the kind of foundation upon which genuine and lasting love is built. You chose to remain present. You chose to keep feeling. You chose to continue caring, even when circumstances seem to give you every possible reason to walk away. And that matters more than you may realize. To love someone through uncertainty, through distance, through seasons where nothing feels clear and silence stretches on longer than you ever expected. And to do so without allowing that experience to turn you bitter requires something that cannot be imitated. It cannot be learned from a book or copied from someone else. Either that capacity exists within you or it does not. And it exists within you. That is not a small detail about who you are. It may actually be one of the most defining qualities you possess. It is precisely that quality that is guiding you towards something genuine, not toward a relationship that keeps you permanently unsteady. Not toward a connection where you are constantly trying to decode mixed signals. Not toward a situation where you endlessly wonder where you stand. Not toward a dynamic where you are always preparing yourself for the next wave of uncertainty. And certainly not toward a love that makes you feel as though your emotions are somehow too large for the space they have been given. You are moving towards something that fits naturally. Something that does not require you to shrink yourself, tone yourself down, or hide parts of who you truly are. A love that feels the way a deep breath feels after carrying tension in your chest for far too long. That is not merely a poetic image. That is genuinely the direction this journey is moving if you continue doing what I am about to describe. So what does that actually look like in everyday life? What do you do today, tomorrow, and in the days ahead. Here is the most important and perhaps the most challenging part. I am not going to make it sound easier than it really is. You turn toward yourself with intention. You do it consciously. You do it sincerely. Not as a performance of moving on, not as a way of sending them a message, not as a strategy designed to create a reaction, and not as a long-term game intended to produce a particular outcome. You genuinely begin redirecting the energy you have been pouring outward, and you bring it back home to yourself. You start asking yourself a question that perhaps you have not asked in a very long time. A question that may even feel unfamiliar at first. What do I actually need right now? Not what do they need? Not what could I say differently? Not what could I become? Not what action might finally change things between us? Not what would make them return, open up, or finally understand? What do you need? What would genuinely bring you peace today? What part of your own life has quietly been neglected because your focus was fixed on something that always felt just beyond reach? You begin tending to those places. You begin saying yes to yourself with at least a portion of the enthusiasm you have spent giving away to everyone else. The things you postponed because you were waiting for life to feel more settled first, you begin doing some of those things now. The experiences you kept delaying until circumstances felt clearer, you begin allowing yourself to enjoy them anyway. The friendships that slowly drifted because so much of your emotional energy was invested elsewhere, you begin reconnecting with some of those people. The parts of yourself that ended up sitting on a shelf because you became so absorbed in this situation, you carefully bring them back down and give them attention again. You remember who you are outside of waiting. None of this requires pretending the love is not there. None of it requires forcing yourself to stop feeling what you feel. And none of it asks you to deny your emotions. It is simply about allowing your life to expand back into its natural shape, so that you are no longer living inside a small, emotional room built entirely around one person and one possible outcome. And something interesting begins to happen when you genuinely start doing this. A shift occurs in the way you carry yourself. It is not dramatic. It is not instantaneous. It does not happen overnight. It is quieter than that, but it is absolutely real. You stop feeling like an unfinished sentence waiting for someone else to supply the ending. You stop feeling trapped in a permanent state of waiting. You stop believing your life cannot fully begin until this particular situation finally resolves itself. Instead, you begin feeling like a complete person, a person whose life contains meaning, movement, color, and purpose, regardless of what any one relationship may or may not be doing. And that feeling matters, that groundedness, that sense of being rooted in your own existence, rather than suspended inside someone else's uncertainty. It changes your presence. People around you notice it, even if they cannot fully explain what they are sensing. There is something powerful about a person who is genuinely at home within themselves. And that quality is magnetic in the truest sense of the word. It attracts rather than chases. It invites rather than pursues. And the person you have been loving through all of this will notice it as well, perhaps more than anyone else. They will feel the difference. And I want to be very clear here. This is not a strategy. This is not a technique designed to produce a specific outcome. The last thing I want is for you to hear this as some kind of formula for making another person respond. It is not. It is simply what naturally happens when someone stops relating to another person from a place of lack and begins relating from a place of wholeness. The entire dynamic starts breathing differently. Space opens up. Pressure begins to dissolve. And suddenly there is room for something genuine to emerge that could not emerge before. Now I want to talk about them for a moment, because there is something you may need permission to understand. They are not the villain in this story. I know there have likely been moments when the pain tempted you to see them that way. Moments when the distance, inconsistency, or silence made it appealing to create a simpler explanation where someone was clearly wrong and someone else was clearly right. But reality is often more complex than that. They are not cold-hearted. They are not indifferent. They are not unaffected. What you have been interpreting as distance is often something much more complicated. It is someone who, somewhere along their journey, usually long before you ever entered their life, learned to associate love with danger. They learned that closeness comes with risk, that vulnerability comes with consequences, that opening your heart can cost more than you are prepared to lose. And because of that, love began to feel unsafe. Not consciously, not intentionally. Nobody sits down and decides to believe those things. Those beliefs are formed through experiences. They are built gradually by moments that leave lasting impressions, before a person is even old enough to fully understand what is happening. And so what appears to be them pulling away may actually be them managing a fear that has been living inside them for years. A fear that existed long before you arrived. A fear that has little to do with your worth and everything to do with their history. And despite how it may seem, you remain present in their thoughts. In the quiet moments between distractions, in the spaces where life slows down enough that they can no longer avoid what is happening inside them. You are there. They feel the absence of your energy even during the times when they were the ones who created that distance. There is a tension within them regarding you that does not simply disappear because communication has become limited. Because what they feel is not really about physical proximity. It reaches much deeper than that. It touches something within them that remains unfinished, something they have not fully worked through, and that unfinished work does not belong to you. You cannot complete it for them, no matter how much you care, no matter how clearly you think you understand what they need, no matter how much love you are willing to offer as support along the way. That path is theirs to walk. That healing is theirs to face. That growth is theirs to choose. And until they do, no amount of effort from you can carry them across a bridge they must learn to cross themselves. What you can do, the one truly powerful thing available to you in this moment, is refuse to let their fear become the author of your story. Refuse to absorb their unresolved struggles as proof that something is missing within you. Hold yourself with such genuine dignity and such steady self-respect that when they eventually move through whatever has been holding them back, what they find is you at your fullest. Not diminished by waiting, not emptied by longing, not exhausted from searching for validation that should have been coming from within all along, but standing firmly in your own light, grounded, complete, and genuinely prepared for what comes next. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a morning that may be closer than you realize. You wake up, and the first thing you notice is that the weight is gone. That particular heaviness that has lived in your chest for so long that you almost forgot it was there. The constant pressure, the quiet ache, the uncertainty that followed you from one day into the next. It is no longer there. Not because your feelings disappeared, not because you stopped caring about this person, and not because you forced yourself into emotional detachment. It is gone because the love finally has a place to belong. Because what once felt unresolved has found resolution. Because the thing that always seemed destined to happen has finally happened. And it is no longer waiting somewhere in the future to become real. It is simply real. Imagine turning toward this person and looking at them fully, really seeing their face, and noticing something there that you have not seen before, or perhaps have not seen in a very long time. Not hesitation, not conflict, not that familiar expression of someone who is physically present, yet emotionally holding part of themselves back. Instead, you see peace. A quiet, settled peace. The calm certainty of someone who has made a complete choice and no longer questions it.